record here on my end. Okay. Great to meet you, Nancy.
Great to meet you.
How are you today?
I'm fine. I'm enjoying your podcasts.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that.
You're a
Yeah.
very good host.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Where are you located at exactly?
Lakewood Ranch near Sarasota, Florida.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I went to Siesta Key years ago. And yeah, it's just a different world. I mean, when you come from Missouri and you're landlocked and there's nothing to look at and you go and see an ocean, you're like, "Oh my God, what am I doing?"
We get
So,
a lot of people from Missouri here.
yeah. Yeah. It's good looking down there for sure. So,
Yeah.
um, you have a very interesting story. You have a very rich background. I'm very interested in how you arrived at where you're at now. So, what I want to do before we do anything, and I think some of us are a little tired of the pandemic, but I think it's worthy of us to have a measuring stick on where we're at right now. So, how did you survive that time period, and how has it changed the way that you live now?
I survived the pandemic by cooking and gaining weight. And I'll be completely honest with you, doing some day drinking
Right.
because I would get so depressed. My husband had just been diagnosed with Parkinson's.
Wow.
So I was dealing with that. And, there were days he really wasn't doing well. And, the doctors weren't seeing anyone.
Right.
So it was really very stressful. Like many of us, you start baking again and then you're going to eat it, right?
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
But no, I've always had, a very a strong resolve to get through things. I'm the middle of 7 kids.
Yeah.
So it's sort of, you know, you have to elbow your way through life sometimes. So that's
And
what
you
I,
Yeah, and you have to shoulder a lot.
yeah, I actually, yes, I have been shouldering a great deal lately, but everybody's got something right now. The country's falling apart, the economy's falling apart, Congress is non-functional. It's if you sit back and think about it for the purpose of your grandchildren, it gets very concerning.
Yeah, how we've gone along this far with things just like seemingly like we put a band-aid on gushers, it's insane. I think one of the biggest problems that we have is that the Congress historically has the lowest ratings of anybody in the world. And for whatever awful reason, we continue to put them back in. There's just And even those that are idealistic that think they're going to come in and ride in on the pony and save everybody, doesn't take long for them to just fall into line with what everybody else is doing.
You're right.
It's wild.
It's disturbing.
Yeah.
I think that there are very, very well-intentioned people in Congress. It's a big sacrifice to run for office.
Yeah.
I really admire the pith that it takes. That is, unless you make up your resume.
Right.
But that's a different issue.
That is a whole different issue. Oh my God.
No, I
That
think
guy.
I have to admire people who, running for any office. My ex-husband was a judge, and in Pennsylvania, you had to run for office. You're elected.
Yeah.
And, even though he had stellar, pedigree, law school, undergrad, he was like all-American boy for Rotary or whatnot. They still, people still try to,
Uh-huh.
take shots at him.
Yep.
It's very, very hard. Even in a small little community, it's hard.
Hmm.
So I can't imagine what it's like to get to Congress and think that you're going to
Yeah.
change the world.
Yeah.
And all you're going to do is change yourself.
Yeah. There you go. Yeah, that should be a quote for sure. Um, so it on paper, it's very clear what you do, which you have kind of both the worlds, being a relationship expert and then being a divorce attorney. But I want to kind of boil this down a little bit. Let's put
Sure.
you in front of grade school kids, third graders at a career day. One of the kids looks up and asks you, "What do you do for a living?" How do you encapsulate what you do, all of it?
What I do is try to help people focus on what they should look for when they're looking for a life partner. Just like when you're looking for a friend,
Hmm.
there are certain things you should look for.
Right.
You should look that they're not going to bully you. They're not going to overly criticize you, but they are going to tell you the truth about some things that you really probably should know about yourself.
Yeah.
So what I do is I try to teach people and coach them about how to look for somebody who you want to spend the rest of your life with, just like your mommy and daddies did. That's what I would say.
So, what I want to know, I'm always so interested in talking to relationship experts. How is it that human beings bungle up something that's so important, such a part of every song and every book that we read? How do we get it wrong until probably later in life, unless we're lucky and get it early?
That's an excellent question. And, you know, there's been so much research on this, recently. And, we're finding that the area of the brain that stimulates the dopamine, which is what gives you that high
Hmm.
when you think, someone's interested in you or you're interested in someone else.
Hmm.
It's the same area of the brain that triggers hunger and thirst. And dopamine lights up the same area of the brain as cocaine does. So how do we get it wrong? We think that that feeling of, unending, profound understanding on this other person is real, and it's not. And we make bad judgments about who we partner up with.
Yeah.
And, almost every podcast I've been on, and I've been on like 60 of them, you know, people ask me, what's the number one reason for divorce? And I say, incompatibility to start with.
Yeah.
And there are so many things people can do. As a nurse, we did a lot of prevention. And as a relationship coach, I'm trying to prevent the divorce. I spent
Right.
over 30 years taking them apart. I'm spending my retirement trying to keep people together. And you do that by educating them about what it is that they're misperceiving in the relationship. And we all come to our adult relationships, whether it be our spouse, our children, our colleagues, our friends. We all come to our adult relationships with some core wounds. I'm sure you've heard this.
Yeah.
Something always happens in your childhood.
Hmm.
I mean, nobody's childhood is perfect.
Yep.
If you weren't bullied by somebody else as a teenager, we bully ourselves.
Yeah.
We're so critical of ourselves.
Yeah.
And, the wrong look, you come down and you're all dressed and your mother says you're going with that, you're going like that. I mean, it's crippling.
Yeah.
So trying to learn that you're not to misperceive a look or a gesture is really essential,
Yeah.
in a relationship.
So, when you were in the third grade, what did you want to be when you grew up?
I wanted to be a doctor,
Okay. Okay.
but I'm a lot older than you are. I mean, when I graduated from high school, the chances were in 1965 you became a teacher or a nurse. You weren't going to become a doctor because, I have boys to educate. You're going to get married. Whoever you marry is going to be able to take care of you. You're never going to have to work.
Yeah.
So I'm not wasting the money.
Yeah. So let's go back to your childhood. Where were you born and raised, and what were these seeds that got into you to get into nursing, to get into to law, and now relationships? How did all that happen?
Um, well, as I said, I'm in the middle of 7 children.
Right.
I was born in New York City. My father worked for Bell Labs on West Street. He actually worked for Bell Labs for almost 50 years when he retired. Um, he was always on the fast track. In those days, if you wanted to be promoted, you moved. There was no Zoom.
Yeah.
The phones, he worked for Bell Labs, they were inventing different things for phones.
Yeah.
And, you had to travel. So I moved 8 times growing up.
Wow.
And I think that, moving, and as I said, every time you move, you have to be accepted into a new group. You have to find your tribe, your posse. You
Hmm.
have to find the people who you feel you're going to be comfortable with. So, that was a learning experience. And, you know, we never complained because my mother never complained, God rest her soul. I don't know how she moved 7 kids 8 times, but she did.
Oh, wow.
Albeit, I will tell you, she enrolled me in the wrong grade twice, but I
Uh,
forgave her for that.
right.
Anyway,
Yeah.
but, no, I just, you know, it's different today.
Yeah.
Kids, they ask questions, all these Instagram things. Some of these kids are so adorable, but they're so fresh to their parents.
Yeah.
And they express their wants and their needs and their attitudes. That would never have been accepted when I was growing up. I
Yeah.
mean, in the 50s and 60s, you didn't talk back to your parents.
Yeah. It's a different time. There's so many things that go into this. Um, and there's so much access to information and yeah, there's so much that's happening right now. I have a couple teenagers at home, so I understand there's levels of this where it's a totally different ball game. I think one thing that parents lose sight of sometimes is that they were in that position. They feel like there's some existential moment that washed over them where it's like this is the way they should be, but there's a level of amnesia where they forget that they went through the same kind of things. Maybe it didn't materialize the same way, but we all went through that angst and that uncertainty and that trying to figure out who you are.
Well, it's part of our development, our human development, and so much is based upon, how we were wired to
Yeah.
survive.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, you think about it, we were wired to reproduce and to survive
Right.
and to carry our DNA on. And that again is what all of the research that is coming down talks about all of the chemicals and the transition. There's three stages, the dopamine stage, the serotonin stage, and then the oxytocin stage. And, the interesting thing is that you can regenerate that dopamine in a
Right.
relationship, even if your relationship is struggling. There are things that you can do, and there are things that you can do to regenerate the oxytocin. If you touch your spouse or your partner, just very gently on the skin, that stimulates oxytocin.
Wow.
If instead of just giving them a peck on the lips, if you just linger for a second or two, that stimulates the dopamine.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there are all kinds of things people can do, to stimulate the chemicals that keep the marriage going.
That's interesting. You would mention tribe, finding your people. Who's been kind of a role model or a hero for you in your life? Someone that's fueled and made you who you are?
Um, I've been very blessed because I've had a number of role models, but I'd have to say, for the purpose of getting through hard times, it'd have to be my mother and my father.
Yeah.
I think my father probably had more influence on me than my mother in some ways.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. In that same vein, if you could meet anybody alive right now, somebody that's inspirational, you can spend some time with them, who would it be?
It's, people are, everybody says the same thing, but I probably want to meet Michelle Obama.
She's the number one. That's for sure.
Well, I read her book Becoming, and she didn't have it easy,
Oh, yeah, right.
and she gave up
Mhm.
a
Yep.
lot to basically serve the country,
Yeah,
to become the first lady,
yeah.
and all the threats against her and all the
Oh,
hatred.
oh.
And, I mean, that's walking the walk and talking the talk.
Mhm, mhm.
And there are so many other people, in politics. I mean, Nancy Pelosi, obviously, I admire. Um, you know, I'd have to learn how to hand talk though if I ever wanted her to dinner because she talks with her hands so
Oh,
much.
all the time. She has that Italian blood in
But
her, that's how they
I
yeah.
mean, I mean, there are so many role models. Hillary Clinton, I know people either love her or hate her. I've met her twice. She, in fact, is my birthday twin. We were born on October 26, 1947.
Oh, okay.
I was born, it was a Sunday, it was the celebration of Christ the King. And we were both born around the same hour. And I'm not really big into astrology, but there are so many characteristics and things that she has that I have. Scorpios are going to take over the world at some point. We're both Scorpios.
Okay. All right. I didn't know where that line was. I was October 13th, so that's Libra. I didn't.
Yeah, you're Libra. You're sort of even,
Yeah.
even.
Right. Right. There was a show that came out on HBO years ago called Left Behind, and it was about the rapture. It was Jennifer Aniston's Justin Theroux, and there were some other people in it. But the day of the rapture was October 14th, which is weird. So
Wow.
yeah, so I don't know how they arrived on that date, but anytime I think about that kind of time period, but anyways, it's interesting how all that plays out. To me, Hillary has been given such a raw deal so many times, and she's always been classy and risen above it, and she would have done so well as a president. I think she would have averted and changed so many things that happened and transpired, unfortunately. But what are you going to do? So, but
Well, I mean, as I said, I think in some ways during her campaign, she was her own worst enemy
right,
in some situations. That whole, and of course, Comey deep sixed her.
yeah,
I mean, after that came out, I don't, the woman didn't have a chance. I
yeah,
don't think she realized that. I think
yeah,
she was so set back on her heels when she, it looked like she was losing,
yeah.
and Trump, who I don't even really think wanted it.
Oh, I don't think so either. Yeah.
I don't know. I'll tell you. Mm-mm.
Oh, that's a whole other rabbit hole right there. So let me ask you this. Every day we wake up, we have motivations of things that we want to do, that we want to get done, we want to accomplish. What is the ultimate motivator for you?
The ultimate motivator is to do what I've always wanted to do, and that is, well, I did it. I wrote a novel about relationships, and it's actually doing very well on Amazon. And
Yeah.
these are not reviews by my family and friends because none of them have read the book. But in any event, I love to write. I've been writing my whole life. And, as I said, my husband has Parkinson's, so he doesn't feel, sometimes he gets up in the morning, he has breakfast, and he goes back to bed. So, I mean, it's writing is wonderful for me because, I'm sure you're a writer. I'm sure you've written, and, certainly if you're doing these podcasts, you've got that creative element in your brain. You go to a different world. I mean, you're someplace else,
Yeah.
when you're not thinking about yourself. You're thinking about your topic and your characters. And, what motivates me is I enjoy life now. I mean, let's face it. I'm very, very lucky. I live in a bubble. I live in a gated community. I live in a bubble. I mean, I don't have to worry, and my grandchildren at this point don't have to worry about dodging bullets. I'm not saying that they won't have to, but I mean, we haven't been touched by any of that. And we have enough money for the rest of our lives. We've got good friends. We've got excellent health care.
There you go.
I mean, what's not to be grateful for? I think
Absolutely.
what I would have to say is what keeps me going is gratitude.
Yeah.
My children, my grandchildren will never, never have the opportunities I've had in my life. They'll never have the ability to make the kind of money I made as a woman, as the only divorce lawyer in a small town. Well, it wasn't that small. It's the third largest city in Pennsylvania, but
Yeah.
it's still very provincial.
Yeah.
And, I was chair for the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania Domestic Relations Rules Committee for 6 years.
Yeah.
And that has to be a unanimous decision on the justice's part. I mean, I've been very blessed.
So the one thing about this country more specifically, I mean, I think it's worldwide, is that divorce is a huge thing. What over all of these years of being in a position of settling disputes between couples, what's been the most surprising thing to you that you learned in this process?
I think the most surprising thing that I've learned is how insignificant some of the arguments start that create an atmosphere of somebody wanting to end the relationship. I mean, too much lint in the dryer. She's never cleaning the lint out of the dryer, fights over the thermostat. And then I represented an extremely wealthy woman. I've represented some very high profile people. So I never say their names. But she and her husband had an argument about the color of the front door.
Wow.
And he got so angry, he left. And she waited and waited for him to come back, and he didn't.
Wow.
Now, albeit he was having something on the side anyway.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure he was planning on really leaving. I mean, that was the end for him.
Yeah.
So after he left and he filed for divorce, and he obviously didn't want to come back, she painted the door the color he wanted.
There you
But he
go.
didn't come back. But I mean, some of the things that people argue about, seriously,
Yeah.
every 42 seconds in the United States, there's a divorce filed.
Wow.
There are 3 divorces during the period of time that it takes a couple who's getting married to say their marriage vows.
Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't realize it was that high.
Yeah.
Wow.
There's 430 divorces during the 5-hour average period of a wedding reception.
Wow.
And every 16 seconds in this country, somebody gets married.
Wow.
So you've got over 2 million people getting married and almost 1 million getting divorced.
Wow.
But you said
Great.
something I did want to touch on. You said, maybe the older you get, the wiser you get. The average 50% of the first marriages in the United States, and the average length of the marriage is about 7 years, 7 to 8 years, will get divorced. They say, well, it's not 50%. It's 47 to 49. After the pandemic, it's 50%, trust me.
Yeah.
And second marriages, 60%, third marriage is 70%. So think about it. You get on an airplane and the pilot comes on and says, we have a 50% chance of making it to our destination. What are you going to do? People get divorced anyway, and they know there's a 50% because they're going to be different.
Yeah. Yep.
Hope is the thing with feathers that lodges in the soul, Emily Dickinson.
Yeah.
And, hope springs eternal in all of us.
Yeah.
And hope that it's going to get better if you're struggling in a relationship, hope that your marriage is going to be different. But make no mistake about it. If you get married, there are going to be arguments. If you get married, there are going to be fights. And the way to really successfully make it through to a long-term relationship is to know how to resolve those arguments and fights, how to do conflict resolution with the person that you've promised that you would never hurt. They've given you their heart, and you've promised to take care of it and not break it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you have to regroup and really think about it, which is my second book, The Malnourished Marriage, 5 Essential Emotional Nutrients for Healthy Relationship. And that's what I talk about in that book.
Yeah. So of all the things that you've accomplished in this life, what are you the proudest of?
You're asking me, a grandmother? My children and grandchildren.
Sure.
Yeah.
So speaking of youth, if you have a dream tonight, you run into a 20-year-old version of yourself, and based on the wisdom you've gained in your life, you could give that version of you a piece of advice. What would that advice be?
Don't do what other people want you to do or expect you to do. That's what I mean, I've always been a pleaser. And in many ways, it stood me in good regard. And in some ways, it's not been good. And, I got married when my ex-husband was on the way to Vietnam, and I knew I shouldn't have done it. I really, and I said to him, I'm not sure I love you that way. You'll learn to love me. I'm going to die anyway. I'm not coming back. I need to know that you're here for me. My father worked, I told you, for Bell Labs, and he worked on a a secret project during World War II in New York City. He was in a suit, well dressed, walking on the street, and women would come up to him all the time and say, "What's wrong with you? My husband, why aren't you in uniform? Why aren't you fighting?"
Yeah.
That impacted him, so that when my ex-husband, shows up in his, second lieutenant uniform, he's got orders to ship out to Vietnam. My father, I won't say he pushed me, but I did tell him, "Daddy, I'm not sure." "No, no, no, no. He's from a good family. He's coming back. He's going to go to graduate school. He's going to take care of you. He's the best thing you've ever, he's the best one. I like him the best." So I got married.
Yeah.
And God bless him. I mean, honestly, he was a very good husband, very good father to my children. But there was never that, do you know what
Yeah.
I mean?
Oh yeah. I get it.
You
I
you
get it.
need the
Uh-huh.
you need the dopamine.
Yep.
You
Yep.
need the cocaine rush.
Yeah.
And I never had it.
Yeah. I understand. I've been divorced, so I understand how all that works. I've been down that road before, and you gotta find what's right. There's so many levels of what you're saying that make sense. So as a writer, someone that's a really good writer that finds solace in writing, what was the book for you early on that either parted the curtain for you to want to read more or to write?
Yeah, I loved James Michener.
Yeah.
I mean, all of his books. I mean, I love history. I love his books. I mean, I I just, I was a avid reader, as a child. All the, they used to have these Good Housekeeping books with all the, stories. Nancy Drew
Yeah.
with her blue Cadillac, and she's
Yeah.
always solving. I mean, but as I got older, of course, I read The Tropic of Cancer,
Yeah.
every Lady Chatterley's Lover, and
Sure.
everything. But you know, Dr. Zhivago, I mean,
Yep.
that was an amazing book.
Yeah.
Of Mice and Men. I mean, Rabbit Run. I guess, well, I live in Florida, so none of those books are available anymore to the children.
That's so weird. All of
Uh,
that's just bizarre. It's like an alternate reality. Weird,
mhm.
weird, weird. So throughout your entire life, everyone has had a perception of you. You've had different pockets and of people, whether it's clients or family or friends. But ultimately, you're in control of all of this. What's been, what is your perception of you? Who do you actually think you are?
Um, I think I'm a very direct. Um, I'm opinionated, sometimes to a fault. Um, and I think I've really grown in terms of mellowing and really trying to understand other people's position far more. As a lawyer, you defend, I mean, there is no other position. It's your
Right.
client's position.
Yeah.
And, when you go to law school, it's sort of like the Marines of the mind. They take your mind apart and then they put it back together again. And I wasn't like that as a nurse. I did become like that. And it's not good in a marriage to feel like you have to argue your case all the time.
Yeah.
So but I don't, and I'm not practicing. I haven't practiced for 5 years. My husband's an absolute prince. I mean, I finally got it right. And I don't know. I think my daughter will tell you I've mellowed tremendously.
Well, I think a part of that comes with age, and I think that's just a part. I mean, if you truly do learn from what you've gone through in your life, I think there's a large level of that that's a part of the process. Um, and I know personally for me, I didn't understand a lot of that until I had a child with special needs. There's so much of
Oh,
this world that just never existed until that happened.
oh,
So
may I inquire? What are the special needs?
he has an extra long chromosome on his 15th, on his 15th. So it's led to developmental delays. He's actually educationally he's on the autism spectrum. He doesn't have autism. but there's been delays. But his name's Miles. He's wonderful, but it just makes you see everything that you encounter in this life in a whole different way. So there's all of those things in our lives that we have that open our eyes up. And youth, sometimes you're just not around long enough experiencing it to realize it. So I think it's what you take with that experience and make into wisdom. It's like making wine. You just ferment it and hopefully it turns out into the right genie, and here we are. So
Well, when we have children, it's no longer about us, it's
right.
about them. And then when you have a child who has special needs, I mean, it's really profoundly changing, you
Yeah.
know. My first child died shortly after she was born from hyaline membrane disease. And, that profoundly changed me.
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I couldn't even imagine. So Nancy, if anyone out there wants to get your books, hire you, learn more about you, where is the best place to go?
The best place would be to my website, Nancy Perpall, PERPALL.com. And I'm on LinkedIn, although I haven't posted very much. I'm on Facebook and Instagram.
Okay.
My book, Around Which All Things Bend, which of course is love, is on Amazon and available in Barnes and Noble. I think you have to order it there. I'd love to hear from your audience, and if I can help any of them, they can shoot me an email at Nancy Perpall, at nap@nancyperpall.com. So I'm available.
Excellent. Nancy, this has been great. Thank you for opening up. What a wonderful story. There's so much that goes into it. And I'm fascinated by this dichotomy of you being in nursing and then law. And I mean, there's such an evolution that's gone through your bloodline as a human. It's very inspiring. So thank you for opening up. And I gotta ask you, living in Florida, I always think, how often do the natives go to the ocean? How often during like a 7-day period do you physically go out and say, wow, I'm looking at this enormous body of water?
Um, because of the red tide,
Oh,
uh, not much.
yeah.
Prior to that, maybe once a week. But
Okay.
the bay is right here. So
Yeah.
I mean, I see the bay, I see water.
Yeah.
And of course I live in a lake, so I see water every day. But
Okay.
um most of my most people, when it's not the red tide, I mean, you couldn't even breathe.
Wow.
DeSantis, we had that spill,
Yeah.
and he keeps letting the chemicals little by little into the bay, Tampa Bay, and it comes down here, and it's very bad. It's
Yeah.
very bad.
I can only imagine. Wow. All right. Well, I just had to know from a local perspective. So, well, again, Nancy, thank you. I really appreciate you opening up. Best of luck with everything.
Okay, thank you so much. This was fun.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.